I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff, and here with me in the studio, recording live, is my guest and co-host for the week. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Matt Bernicom. Been sleeping on Dean's couch.
That's right. And how's that going, Matt?
It's great.
Really check in now.
Pretty good. It's a pull-out couch. It's very comfortable. Dean's cat is around, and that's fun too. So it's good.
These creaky chairs. Can't stop them from creaking.
In the studio. It's great. That's right, folks. Coming live to you, well, kind of from Canada, the Great White North. That's what we call it up here. That's what the Canadians have been saying all week long. They've been referring to their home as the Great White North, and here we are. Cool. Well, that's it. That's all the cold open you get, I think. And we can
the Great White Cold North Open.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's been good. We went to, what did we do? We went to the Art Gallery of Ontario yesterday.
Yep, we went to the Shoe Museum.
Today, yeah, that was pretty good.
It was really fun.
Surprisingly good, actually.
A great exhibit about colonialism and shoes. Not what I expected going in, but it's what I wanted, and I got it, so that's great.
Yeah, although the bottom of the museum is also a great illustration of a failure, maybe, to think about colonialism and shoes, so it's great also because you can experience the contradictions live.
Yeah, that's right. They're all right there in the museum itself. And as you work up, you ascend towards the heavens and become enlightened at the end.
Exactly. Literally, you go through the enlightenment. Ooh. There's a lot of weird energy when you're in the same room podcasting.
Yeah, I gotta say, I like it better when we're not here doing it.
Yeah, it's weird to look at you at the same time.
It's true. All right, well, apart from all of that, yesterday, Dean and I also went to a solidarity protest downtown Toronto to show some solidarity with the land defenders in the Wet'suwet'en territory, which is a pretty neat thing. As a person from the U.S., this is something I'm woefully stupid about. There's a lot going on in this situation for sure, and I'm not going to try to say it all right here on this podcast, but we went, and that was cool. The gist of the situation, I guess, is that Coastal GasLink, which is a gas company, is trying to run a pipeline through their territory without the consent of the indigenous people that are there, which is, I gotta say, a bad move. Speaking of colonialism, if it was me, if I was the CEO of Coastal Gas, wouldn't do that.
Bad idea.
Yeah, just don't. It's so easy. Dean, do you want to talk about it more, being a person from the Great White North?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is a messed up situation. That's the short of it for sure. That's a gas company trying to run a pipeline through Wet'suwet'en territory. There's a lot going on. Actually, so Development and Peace, which I work for, signed a solidarity statement that you can read along with other ecumenical people that lays out some of the background. So I don't know. We could put that in the show notes, I guess. But yeah. The short of it is the Wet'suwet'en people, there was... they have a bunch of land that even the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized as their land. And nevertheless, Coastal GasLink wants to run a pipeline through it without consenting, especially the hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en people. And they have been resisting this particular project for a long time, for several years, especially like in the last, 5 years. They've been resisting development for that kind of development for a long time, but especially in the last maybe 5 years, there have just been a lot of boiling over tensions with like the RCMP invading them several times. So anyway, this past week, the Wet'suwet'en people, like the land defenders, also all the people that are there, some of them are settlers, whatever, all the people doing land defense. The people resisting that pipeline evicted Coastal GasLink formally, and they gave the workers several hours to leave. and then they blockaded a major road that was used by the company. And as you could guess, Canada deployed federal police, the RCMP, arresting and assaulting those land defenders, and they put an end to the blockade. So the action in Toronto was in response to all that. And it was great. It was powerful. It started outside the bank RBC, which is invested in the pipeline, and then it ended in a building in Toronto that has Coastal GasLink offices in it. And, there's lots to say about that. You should look it up. It's a situation that you should know about for sure. But it really got our wheels turning about things like Christianity. What does an event like this say about being a Christian person? Thinking about colonization, climate change, ecosocialism, the COP26 conference, all the stuff that you talk about, I guess, after you go to the demonstration. So we'll talk a little bit about all those things, I guess. All the stuff we talked about on the subway ride home.
That's right. Well, it's all like interconnected. It's hard to see any of these problems as something very separate. So I think it makes sense that we're just going about it.
I think you're right.
So in this episode, we're going to take this opportunity to go some more about it. We're going to make some connections about what happened in COP26 and something that the decolonial theorist Walter Manillo called the Christian Afterworld, which is, just like an intellectual framework for maybe thinking through the problems that Christians have caused in the world through both ideology and like their institutional power and so on.
It's a good term.
It is a good term. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something people are kind of always dealing with and you don't know about it. Basically, we live in a global order that has emerged historically out of Christian people in countries dominating the world. That's, I guess, part of it. And then that should make Christians especially uncomfortable since the global order is presently like ecocidal, right? It's undeniable to say that Christianity has been a really important building block for both capitalism and for colonialism. You can't say that it's not, because if you did, you'd be wrong. So anyways, yeah, but yeah, there are all these tensions within Christianity to say like, well, the world could be a better place, or that Christians should be really on the side of the poor or the oppressed, or people who are really, I think, in harm's way because of that ecocide. So, on the one hand, Christians have done a lot of evil in the world, and they continue to do a lot of evil in the world. And on the other hand, what if you want to be a Christian and you don't want to do that evil stuff or think differently about it? So it's really important that we maybe work through some of that stuff together.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I guess the way this links up especially to that action yesterday is it's kind of like, what does it mean to be a Christian person in a protest that is symptomatic of a project of Christian colonialism, right? That's what Canada was, a project of Christians colonizing a place and subjugating indigenous peoples, or trying to kill them or destroy their culture and so on. And this event of Coastal GasLink is like tied to that history, right? So the Coastal GasLink pipeline is not being done in the name of Jesus Christ necessarily. Maybe for some people it is, probably. Like
those people need to stop.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like some weird Christian right-wing people who do think that, but the official story is not that, right? The official story is all kinds of other stuff, but underneath all of that, it's kind of an iceberg, right? If you look below, there are lots of Christian ways of thinking that have led to a situation in which we would see a confrontation like that. So if you're a Christian trying to protest that or be upset about that, or be in solidarity with the people who are being victimized or being, the recipients of violence as a result of that, then it's kind of, how do you turn your own faith against the dominating realities of your faith or caused by your faith? And we can connect that too to what's going on at COP26, I think. This might sound like a lot, but I promise it's very important to think about it together, right? Like Matt mentioned the Christian Afterworld. When we think about something like the United Nations or COP26, these are institutions that emerge as a result of historical Christian domination, right? Who are the most powerful countries in the UN? They're mostly historically Christian countries. Who are the countries that are looked at super suspiciously at things like COP26? They are historically non-Christian, non-Western countries, right? China, India, maybe Brazil, right? Brazil's, got its own Christian history, but not in the same way, right? Not a
Right.
European kind of situation. So all that to say, that really affects these kinds of summits, right? That there's this kind of subterranean Christian logic underneath it. So what we really want to do is maybe lay out some of those troubling connections between Christianity, colonization, and so on, and to say, as always, that if Christians want to find a way out of all that stuff, we're going to have to figure out how we contributed to that world, and then be willing to look at both Christian and non-Christian traditions of liberation to try to find a way out of it.
Yeah, for sure. It's not like Christians haven't tried.
Yeah, of course.
They have, but they're bad at it.
I mean, there are Christians. Christians were some of the organizers of the rally we went to. We should say that, actually.
Yeah. Good point.
Christian peacemaker teams, in particular, which are it's an amazing organization. If you don't know about them, look them up for sure. In Canada, they do a lot of work around indigenous solidarity. It's a nonviolent peacemaking group, and they have been doing solidarity trips to Wet'suwet'en territory, especially over this past summer, but before that too. And so anyway, they were some of the organizers, not the only ones, but some of the organizers of that event. So there are lots of good CPT people around. So anyway, but yes, there are Christians opposing it 100%.
Yeah, there are Christians opposing it in productive and I guess also non-productive ways too, is what I mean to say.
Yes, for sure.
You can't pray climate change away. It's not going to work. Unless prayer is like something different than what people usually mean by that word. All right. Cool. So we've said a lot of things about climate change so far. We've said a lot of things about colonialism and some big picture ideas about Christianity, but maybe we can just take a second and say, like, paint a picture of what is actually happening with the climate right now, because I think without a really grounded grasp on what that is, I don't know, maybe some of this falls flat or something, or it doesn't seem as important as it is. Okay, so a few episodes ago, we did talk about the IPCC report about climate change and how bad it is. And I gotta tell you, it's still bad. It hasn't gotten any better. It's really interesting. There's a lot of different pieces of this. But Vijay Prashad has been writing quite a bit about the IPCC report, but also about COP26 and kind of some things going on around, like different types of activism going on around COP26, kind of running concurrently to all of these global leaders meeting. There's also a bunch of leftist organizations that showed up as well to have like a people's tribunal and kind of like see who to hold accountable. It's all really neat, I think, actually. But that being said, let's paint a picture of like maybe what's happening in the world with regards to climate change, and we can kind of get to it, right? I mean, we talked about the colonialism aspect of it, but here's the actual climate change information. This is again from Vijay Prashad. He wrote this for the newsletter for Tricontinental. Vijay Prashad says, according to the report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, a great acronym, unless carbon emissions are reduced, it's unlikely that the key goal of having no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming compared to pre-industrial levels will be met. The IPCC suggests that the faster the world moves to net zero emissions, the better the chance of preventing catastrophic levels of warming. He goes on to say this. Tragically, the COP26 process has been swept into the matrix of dangerous geopolitical tensions driven largely by the United States in its quest to prevent China's scientific and technological advancement. Coal is at the center of the debate, with the argument being made that unless China and India cut back on their coal-fired power plants, no carbon reduction will be possible. Okay, so Vijay Prashad, he's laying it out here for us. Unless things change, the world's going to get hotter. That's it. That's like the bare facts of it. And the IPCC report, as we noted last time around, gives like these three possible futures, all of which are actually pretty bad.
Yeah.
The possible future, though, where there's only 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming is like the best possible solution. But it's worth noting that even in the best possible solution, the world still gets hotter. And in the worst solutions, the world gets significantly hotter. In the last one, it's like uninhabitable. So there's all this going on. But this added note again about COP26 and China and India is like a pretty important piece of the puzzle, right? All of these people are coming together, and wouldn't you know it, it's China and India that are causing all these problems, and not the United States, which is like the biggest producer of emissions on the planet.
Yeah, I mean that piece is huge too, right? Because this is maybe bringing in what we were just talking about in a helpful way, right? That the United States they always do this. If you talk to them about climate change, they will always point the finger at somebody else. And like I said, who are they not pointing it at? Other Christian countries, right? Other big consumer countries, for instance. They pointed instead at these countries like China and India. And there are so many complicated things about it. I mean, Vijay Prashad kind of contextualizes it in like an attempt to hold China back in particular, which sure, like that's true. But there's a lot of other things going on too, right? India and China are historically non-Western countries. India throwing off the British colonial system. China having a different kind of anti-colonial struggle, but nevertheless formed by that kind of non-Western anti-colonial resistance movement. And the key is there are so many things left unsaid when the U.S. points the finger, right? For instance, like China and India have way more human beings in them than the United States and Europe. Their per capita rate of pollution is not nearly the rate of the U.S. and Europe. It's true that they burn lots of coal, but Europe and the United States have burned a lot more coal proportionally. You could never probably do the Industrial Revolution over again and still have a planet at the end of it, right? So China and India will never, ever, ever have the same like price tag of carbon as these Western countries. So that's huge. And maybe the last piece too is like, because of the way that global capitalism is set up, this is a great point made in by Development and Peace. This is where I learned it, at least. So that's great. Because of the way that our economy works, where are our sort of the things that we enjoy in consumer societies, where are they usually made? Places like India, China, Indonesia, right? Places where people point fingers. So if you still want cheap consumer goods, guess who's going to have to pollute so that you can do that? It's going to be these countries that people get upset about. So
it's a good note to just to point out the interconnection of like international trade there.
Exactly.
Right? Like it's not like I mean, I don't want to let anyone off the hook, right? Like there's no point in that, but at the same time, like it's global capitalism that causes people like China or India to have to produce the way they do or to have emissions like they do. So it's not like it's not like they are solely responsible, and it's also not like they aren't responsible at all. Right? It's kind of both, but it's a complex situation.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe just add one last piece, and then we can complain about the U.S. some more in a minute.
Yeah.
We mentioned this Christian Afterworld thing. I think that might be a hard thing to get your brain around, so it's good to sort of put it in these practical terms. So when we talk about the Christian Afterworld, we're talking about a world that we exist in today that was, as Matt said earlier, historically emerging out of the way Christians decided to put the world together. So the United States, it doesn't have a state religion, but it's still a pretty Christian country, right? We've only ever had Christian presidents. Christianity's all over the place.
Well, now we have a Catholic president.
Yeah, that's right. Europe is the same way, right? It's more maybe ostensibly secular, quote unquote, but it still has this extremely important and powerful Christian logic underneath it that continues to shape the way that those countries interact in the world. And because of Christianity and colonialism's integral tie, the wealth of these countries, the power of these countries, is the result of a Christian supremacism that has never been, dialed back, right?
Totally. I mean, it is a hard idea to get your brain around, right? That like, how is it that like Jesus is somehow responsible for all these bad things? And like, well, it's not Jesus' fault, obviously. It actually theologically can't be. But like the thing to draw out here is that like, well, how did colonial powers decide they're going to divide up the quote unquote new world, right? And it's like the Treaty of Tordesillas. It's just like the Pope drawing a line in the map, right? And maybe that's not the Christianity that you practice, but at the same time, you're an inheritor of that. You're an inheritor of that thing, and that power behind like the Pope drawing a line in the map is exactly why the United States is extremely powerful and extremely rich, and the same reason why Europe is extremely powerful and extremely rich. So it's like, it's maybe not the religion that you practice directly responsible for these things, but it's like the institutions of Christianity, it's the ideology of Christianity that says that these things are possible. So, I mean, you just have to kind of recognize that like Christianity is a lot of things at once, and one of those things at least is like the motivator of colonial violence and ecocide, basically.
Right, and then again, that pointing at China and India is a pointing at historically non-Christian countries, right? So the U.S. isn't going to point at Europeans for having too many, like a bad consumer habit. It's not going to point at the United States for driving bad consumer habits that contribute to climate change, right? Nobody's going to point at those. Instead, you point at these other countries, which maybe to borrow again from Walter Bignolo, he points out India and China are sort of de-Westernizing countries, right? They pose a challenge to the achievement of a Western Christian world, a world dominated by Western Christians, and Western Christians, surprise, don't want that to happen, right? So any chance we get to point at other people, we'll take it to try to sort of undercut that rise or our own decline, however you want to see it.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe to hammer this point home just a little bit more, here's another fact from Vijay Prashad, who is kind of laying this all out. This will not conclude our complaining about the United States, but it will definitely bolster it maybe a little bit more. It'll make it more clear. Okay. So Vijay Prashad is writing here about sort of like the, where to place the blame or how to maybe contextualize the blame for, climate emissions and stuff like that. Carbon emissions, climate emissions, not a thing. Carbon emissions.
I'd love to emit more climate.
I mean, yeah, exactly. We're just farting it out here. Okay, so Vijay Prashad says the United States' own proposal to reduce current emissions by 50 to 52% from their 2005 levels. The country's level of per capita CO2 emissions would still make up for 220% of the global average in 2030. If the U.S. were to reach its goal, the country's per capita carbon emissions in 2030 would be 42% higher than China's are today. So I think this is an important statistic. It's kind of, a lot to wrap your mind around in terms of statistics. I don't know, just imagining a graph in my brain. But still, like, even if the United States did the thing that they said they were going to do at COP26, it would still be higher than China's emissions today, right? So it's like, who you pointing the finger at, my guy? Come on, Joe Biden. Joe Biden, the car guy, stop.
Joe Biden, the car guy, exactly. And we could say too, I don't know, people probably made this connection already, but in case you didn't, I guess there are a lot of ironies around Joe Biden in particular making these kinds of agreements at COP26.
Yeah.
Right before going to Glasgow, he met with Pope Francis, right? And Pope Francis also had a message for COP26 and has had lots of other messages about climate change and so on. And there's so much to do about Biden being a Catholic president, and I have no doubt that he likes to go to Mass and so on. But one thing that we can say is apparently these kinds of meetings, right? When Joe Biden meets Pope Francis, those meetings don't really leave much of a political impression. Pope Francis, for instance, explicitly in Fratelli Tutti, the encyclical he did last year, tells us, for instance, that we should stop believing the lie of neoliberalism, as he calls it, that we can solve every problem with a market-based solution. And what did Joe Biden say at COP26? That we need to make sure that we find a good market-based solution to climate change, right? So it's just maybe one more way to sort of point out there are contradictions even in Christians dealing with this problem. And anyway, the car guys are not going to save us.
Yeah, it's true. Being good Leninists, let's just ratchet up the contradictions even more. So Joe Biden, he met with the Pope and then went to COP26. But even before those two things, he decided that he was going to auction off like drilling rights for the Gulf of Mexico, right? So it's not like he's not turning down on the big dial in his office that says carbon emissions. He's not turning it down. He keeps turning it up, and he should stop. Is the thing. Yeah, so it's important, right? We're drawing out these connections that the United States, they want to point their finger at China, they want to point it at India, and listen, those people should also stop doing carbon emissions. Everyone should. There should be more action, I think, across the board. But at the same time, it's not like the United States' hands are clean on the topic. It's far from the fact, and it's hard to see COP26 as anything but very performative.
Yeah.
And on the subway ride back from the Shoe Museum, Dean and I were talking about Greta Thunberg and kind of her place within the conversation about the climate, and there's lots of criticisms of her, and I think that's fair enough. Whatever. Say what you will about Greta Thunberg, but about COP26, she did say something that I thought was really great. She did tweet out the words blah 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 blah, and I agree. I think that she's right. Even we'll kind of talk about this more in a minute, but the result of COP26 was not that people said they were going to become carbon neutral or that they were going to step away from fossil fuels. It's that they were going to start easing away from coal. They're going to start easing away from fossil fuels. And Greta Thunberg is right. Blah 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 blah. That doesn't mean anything. A slow, gradual step away from carbon emissions is still losing. It's still the climate raising 2 degrees more.
Yeah, I think it's important to dial into these opportunities like COP26, where opportunity is a weird way to put it, but I guess opportunities to decide how mad you want to get about climate change, right? This is ostensibly the moment where our leaders, our elected leaders from around the world, the people that we think are leading us somewhere, get together and say what they're going to do, right? Where they're going to lead us. And where they are going to lead us is literally to hell, right? Literally to a place where the world is on fire. It is not a place that we should want to be. And I think that Christians have a hard time being angry. It's just not a good, I don't know. It's weird to put it that way. Christians are angry about weird things, but good Christians, let me put it that way. Good Christians who care about, who want to be good, responsible, progressive type people or whatever, it can be difficult to cultivate a healthy kind of anger. And I think it's important to sort of channel that at a moment like this, to be like, I am upset that my Catholic president or my Catholic prime minister, whether it's Joe Biden or Justin Trudeau, are just refusing to take it seriously, right? And that's what it is at the end of the day. It is a refusal to take seriously what it would mean to deal with the climate crisis, which is also an economic crisis.
Yeah, that's right. It is definitely like a Jesus flipping over tables kind of moment, if anything, right? Like, how mad are you going to be? You should be very mad, I think. This whole time, as at the beginning of COP26, I started reading Kim Stanley Robinson's book, The Ministry of the Future, which is a book about climate change and the problem of inaction about it. I mean, it's a fiction book set in the future, but it's like, it's not very fiction in the sense that it's exactly what's going to happen, probably. A theme of the book is that nobody wants to do, people in power aren't willing to do things that are hard, like move away from fossil fuels, because they rely on them, right? Like, that's the way that they have power in the world. And that's also the way that they have massive amounts of capital in the world. So like, there's a lot of governmental inaction. And on the other hand, there's all kinds of people who are very concerned about that. Like, they want their governments to do something, and there's really no outlet for them to do it. So they turn to awful things like terrorism. But, whatever, in those situations, it's hard to, part of the book is even kind of like unpacking the idea of like, what does terrorism mean in the sense of like, when one side is like blowing up like not nuclear power plant, like one side's blowing up a coal plant and then the other side is like going to kill the entire earth. Like which one's really terrorism, I guess, is a question the book makes you ask. It's kind of interesting, but it's the book has been helping me think through maybe like how mad I should be, or like just how frustrating inaction is, or what that might look like in the long term. And I think that, I don't know. It's the question that we should start asking, though, I think, right? Like, what does it mean to live in a world, where there are no more beaches or something? Because it's basically what the future will be if inaction is the norm. Well, to help us think about that, and also to think about this Christian afterlife thing a bit more, we thought maybe we could take a quick look at at least one Christian who is thinking about it better than most people. And that's Leonardo Boff. Leonardo Boff, a great liberation theologian. You know about him if you listen to this podcast. We talk about him pretty regularly, and his great blog. He's the only one out there still blogging, but he's doing it.
Brian Beto's got a blog, but he's not as regular.
He needs to become a very, very regular blogger. Leonardo Boff. Right. I don't know. What should we say about him? Is there a good introduction that you have?
Sure. He's great. He was a Franciscan priest. He lived among the poorest people in Brazil. He wrote a bunch of books. He got in trouble with the Vatican and then got out of trouble with it. Pope Francis seems to like him. That's very important. He's no longer a priest, but still very much involved in theologizing and working with the poor in Brazil. And he's one of the most significant liberation theology authors from Latin America at all. I guess that's the way to put it.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like ecology, I think.
Yeah, that's right. He was like doing eco-theology before it was cool, alongside other people. Like you should always mention like Ivone Guevara, for example, an important eco-feminist in Brazil, and they think together about, whatever. There's lots of other people going on, but Boff is the blogging one, and therefore it's easier to pay attention to him.
That's right. Boff is the blogging one. He's a slippery guy who gets out of trouble with the church, and that's cool. You can go read his blog even if you wanted to. You have to translate it from Portuguese, which is fine if you have Google Translate. No big deal. Anyways, so Leonardo Boff, he's also been writing about COP26 and kind of some of the themes around it, and I think it's pretty helpful. So let me just read them to you on this podcast. Boff says this: the data from the scientists sent to COP26 to make the right decisions gives one answer. Climate change is caused by the type of social and economic development brought about by the nature of capitalist society, which turns out not to be proven sustainable. The problem is not the climate, but capitalism, which knows neither an environmental nor socio-political ecology. So I think what Boff is saying here is exactly right. It's exactly what we would say, I think, as well. He just said it better on his blog, so that's fair enough. But he's right. I mean, the problem isn't the climate. The problem is all the things that we're doing to the climate. It's the whole logic of capitalism that says accumulation before people, that says, yes, keep burning fossil fuels because we can make a lot of money off of it. Who cares if people die? No big deal. So this is Leonardo Boff, a real Christian person who is thinking about this critically in more ways than just saying like creation care is really important and we should be good stewards of the earth, right? There's something more radical in Boff's analysis. So he goes on to say this as well. Given the urgency of the ecological emergency, the results of COP26 were inadequate and frustrating. The only recommendations were to gradually reduce gases and the use of coal by 2030. He ends his blog saying, human life may eventually disappear and the Earth will keep spinning around the sun, but without us. This can be avoided if there's a global human alliance for the benefit of all life and its diversity. We have the means, science and technology. Some only lack the political will and the emotional bond with nature and the great and generous Mother Earth. And yeah, I mean, Boff is right. The Earth will exist long after we all die, and we shouldn't let that happen, though. It's like kind of it, right? It's such a frustrating thing. The reports tell us that unless we take action soon, things will get very bad for a lot of people. While I'm sure millionaires and billionaires buy, great fortresses on some island somewhere that they can continue living a life of relative luxury. But the rest of us will kind of just like suffer and die, and it'll be awful in all kinds of different and interesting ways that maybe hasn't been awful before. But we have the means to actually take care of these situations. We just have to think around capitalism. But it's like such a frustrating situation because like the answer is to stop being capitalist. The answer is clearly just like ecosocialism. Yet the people who get to make decisions, who try to like solve these problems are all capitalists, so they cannot see it, right? So it's just like an impossible. It's an impasse. The people who are in charge, the people who are at COP26, they clearly can't think this way. It's beyond their capacity.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest irony here is maybe, as we always say in this podcast, say what you will about China, and there's a lot to say about China.
So much to say.
Not a perfect country, not maybe the country of your worst nightmares either. Whatever. It's a country like lots of other countries on the planet. But it does have a different political imagination at work. Again, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But I do think, like, it's important to recognize, too, that there are other political traditions thinking about things like ecology, and China, for instance, is one of those countries thinking in a different way about what it will do about green technologies. China has made a lot of promises outside of COP26, which I think is actually very important, right? Like, promises not contingent on meeting with a bunch of other world leaders. It has made promises about not just reducing its own emissions, but transforming the way that it uses energy and so on, with an understanding that it will need to burn oil and coal to get there, right? That this is a necessary piece of development. And granted, not all promises are kept, but nevertheless, if they do keep them, it will be an ecological solution not premised on on the logic of profit, but on the primacy of human beings, right? The primacy of people and the assumption that you could get to a socialist world that respects the earth and so on. So again, I'm not holding China up as like the leader of our ecological future, but like, it's just to say, Boff is right. The problem is capitalism. And if you don't even have a political leader that can at least say capitalism is not the end, even if it might be complicated during the means or something, then like, I genuinely do not know how you could ever come up with a realizable ecological solution.
Yeah, totally. Or, I mean, if China is too scary for you, which I don't know why it would be, but like, I don't know, Kerala in India is another example, right? It's like, it's a place that's deferred to a socialist model. It's a place that's chosen, a type of direct democracy over everything else. And it's like, it's not again, another alternative political imagination, I guess, to say the least. But I mean, like, it's such a bizarre thing to think that like there is a market solution through this, or that there is a capitalist way through this, because like, I don't know, man, countries actually hinge on being able to sell gas and oil. So like, how do you expect them to do that? I mean, how would you incentivize someone through the market to not sell the thing that makes them a lot of money? Yeah. It makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, okay, here, this is an example. I mean, in the Kim Stanley Robinson book, a science fiction book, they come up with a currency that does incentivize this, but it's a science fiction book, so that's how you know it's not going to really work out. Like, yeah. I mean, the blockchain is not going to get you through this. There's no way around it other than abandoning capitalism, right? Yeah. I mean, finding ways to convince countries to actually keep oil and gas in the ground. And just don't get it out. Just leave it in there, man.
Right.
Leave those dinosaur bones alone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I mean, this is the other piece too that like, first of all, maybe there's two things. The first is it's important to understand political economy and ecology, right? Why is capitalism unable to offer a solution? it's not just because like edgy teens or like cool theologians like Boff don't like the word. It's because like there are logics at work in capitalism that make these things contradictory, right? So for instance, like capitalism is a system of literally infinite economic growth that does not make sense. It is an imaginary way of being. There's more money in the world, more wealth in the world today than there has ever been in history, which is weird. Like, how is that possible, right? The world didn't get any bigger, but wealth got bigger, right? So it's this kind of bizarre numerical system premised on capitalists competing with each other, betting on the future in order to basically edge each other out, right? The planet doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in such a way where it wins and loses bets. Like, it has a different sort of internal logic based on biological rhythms and chains of, reactions and like adaptations or maladaptations or the inability to adapt and so on. And at the end of the day, you have an infinite growth economic system interacting with a very finite, reserved ecological system, right? And if that system isn't allowed to renew itself or kind of metabolize itself, it will not grow. And as Boff says, like, in the end, the Earth will be fine. It will spin around the sun without human beings or other forms of life.
Probably a lot of other forms of life.
Yeah, and like I don't know, the planet probably won't shed a tear about it, I guess, but like we won't be here. So, I would prefer a world where actually the Earth has to continue sort of factoring us in to the metabolization processes or something. And right now, that is not the path that we're on.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's it. And okay, so that's it. That's all there really is to it, right? Is you can't have a system that functions on infinite growth in a very finite world. And when you try, there is this kind of contraction of results and accidents and all kinds of awful things that happen in the meantime, right? Like, like sea levels rising, glacial melt, the acidification of the ocean, like massive heat waves, and like the inability to keep up, energy production in those heat waves. All kinds of really awful things will happen, and that's it. But there are ways of thinking around this, and they are not the ways that Christians have historically thought about them. Dean, I don't know what it's like in the Catholic Church. I'm sure that there are some very nice liberal ways of thinking about about the environment, but in Protestantism, the phrase that always comes up is creation care. Right. Like, you're supposed to be a good steward of the world. And in fact, all of those people who've read Genesis about people having dominion over the world, they've read it just a little bit wrong. The word shouldn't be dominion, it should be stewardship, and we should be taking care of things and like whatever. And like, it's such a nice idea. It sounds great. It's a great thing to learn about in your Christian liberal arts education. But like, I think at this point in the in this point in the scene, it's like not good enough. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't help you, right? You can't even, how would you even like take care of a world well? What would it mean, to just be a good steward of the earth when the forces that want to completely destroy the world and people for profit have all the money and have all the power? It just doesn't make any sense, right? There's no NGO that could take care of that problem. There's no there's no like protest or action that could even take care of that problem. There has to be something different, and has to be a complete systemic change.
I think it's important to keep pressing that, right? That there really is no way out other than the destruction of capitalism, and that's not really what people talk about when they talk about climate care. I mean, if you were going to use that kind of language,
it's a great pitch.
It's a great pitch. You'd have to talk about like creation defense or something. Yeah, I don't know. It's important to recognize that you can't care for creation, even if that's the language you want to use in a capitalist society, right? I don't know. I'm a big believer in like people can use whatever language they want. Some people really like stewardship language for reasons that I'm sure I could sort of sympathize with. It doesn't do it for me, and it's fine. Like, whatever. People can go to the mat for that if that's a thing. But to me, it's always like, but how does it sort of cash out? What's the functionality of it? Cash out, I guess, is a weird analogy to use. Yeah. What's the function of that kind of rhetoric, right? And if stewardship or creation care, or however you want to put it, doesn't end in a call for the destruction of an economic system that renders it impossible to really steward or care for or defend creation, then, it's not creation care, or not in any meaningful sense. It's something else, right? It's a way of talking together, a way of writing theological books or making good sermons, but it's not a way of, being in communion with the planet.
Right. It's not a way of being in communion with the planet. It's not a way of claiming the common good. It's not a way of like respecting future people.
Yeah.
It's just kind of, it's real lukewarm kind of stuff. God will spit you out of his mouth. That's what I'm here to say.
Okay. Well, we've got 20 minutes left. Let's maybe circle this back to the stuff going on at this protest yesterday.
Yeah,
and maybe
totally.
some more of that Christian Afterworld stuff, right? So, okay. When Wet'suwet'en land defenders are defending their land from coastal gas link, right? I would never say, for instance, that that's like creation care or stewardship or whatever it might be.
Sure.
It just wouldn't make sense to put it that way.
Uh-huh.
But as a Christian person in the world trying to think about my relationship to ecology, whatever I decide to call that, whatever language it is, it necessarily has to mean something like standing in solidarity with those people on the front lines who are literally willing to be brutalized by federal police to make sure that a waterway doesn't get poisoned, right? That's what's at stake. And I think if we're going to have a Christian way of addressing things like climate change, we also need to think really carefully about what that means for what actions of solidarity we have to build now, right? And I mean, you said earlier, Matt, like what's in the Catholic tradition necessarily might be different than in Protestant traditions. We're not very good either thinking about ecology. I think Francis is trying.
Yeah.
Laudato Si has some great stuff in it. But the real sort of thing to keep pushing is there is a minoritarian strand that says we have to sort of place indigenous people at the center of how we think about ecology. And that is even endorsed by Pope Francis in his own complicated way. It is not perfect. Pope Francis, too, needs to be decolonized and so on. But he himself says indigenous people are the people who care for the land best, right? And the paradox that's there is like, if you really want to take that seriously as a Christian, you have to recognize that you're also inviting a really complicated relationship with your own Christianity into that conversation, right? Understanding, well, why aren't settler Christians in solidarity with indigenous people? Many of whom are Christian themselves, not all of them, of course, right? Why is there some kind of rift that's happening there? You might ask, why do you even have to sort of, wait around for indigenous people to do something that puts great risk to themselves before we start thinking carefully about all that kind of stuff, right? Lots of critical questions that come up as Christians. And I think it's important that Christians especially start processing that piece too. I think it's really easy actually to say the capitalism bit. Like you can get a lot of Christians on board with being like, yeah, we got to figure out a different economic system and so on. Yes, 100%. But once we start asking those harder questions of like, but what is it in the DNA of Christianity as it has historically expressed itself that creates these kinds of divides, that puts us in colonial relationships, extractive relationships with the land and other people? That is like a very difficult soul searching that, we haven't really scratched the surface of.
That's fine. Yeah, I think that's right. But it makes a lot of sense, right? A different group of people has to be centered in that solution. And it makes sense, but it's a hard thing though, because it does challenge. It challenges the sensibility, I think, within at least some types of Christianity, at least in my very particular type of evangelical Christianity. It's just like, there's a problem, let's solve it, and like, let's do it. But like, but taking it all on yourself or making you like the central player as the savior of a bunch of people is like the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, that's important. Being in solidarity then with indigenous people as they struggle for these things on the front lines, like you said, putting their bodies like at risk of real violence is important. But like maybe that's like one way to start stepping back, or like one line of flight away from that settler mindset, right? To let somebody else kind of like be the leader of that, and like being a good ally or being a good collaborator or co-conspirator or whatever we want to say.
And to be a leader also in a way that doesn't render us maybe passive or off the hook. I think that's also something that can happen, right? Like, it's like, you center whatever oppressed person is in the conversation or something, and then you kind of sit back as the virtuous listener, not wanting to take up any space. I think that is also a dangerous sort of place to end up, right? Like, and it's easy to be there too, because there's lots of anxieties that happen, especially when you feel guilty and all that. But like, it's important too to be like, when you do sort of follow the lead of indigenous peoples, it doesn't usually mean like sit around and wait. It's like, okay, yeah, we're in the middle of this, and like, can you also be in the middle of it some way? Can you like find a way to do this, right? Or I mentioned Christian peacemaker teams earlier. Like, it's such an important model. And there's others too, like the Mennonites in Canada have been doing this, and other Christians as well. Like, the Wet'suwet'en people put out an open call of solidarity, right? And these are Christians who answered that call saying, can we come visit? Can we see what this camp is like? Can we see what Coastal GasLink is doing on the land, right? And they did that. And they're writing stuff about it. They're organizing rallies. They're trying to get other Christians to care about it. They're trying to put their own bodies in the way, right? And not just rely on indigenous people to kind of be the people carrying the burden of like saving the planet, right? Like, it's important to think through the messiness of building that solidarity, but recognizing all the while that, like, as Christians in particular, we're kind of coming to that struggle carrying a lot of baggage, and, like, I don't know, being willing to sort of work that stuff out on our own time is very important.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a good note that you can't wait around for, like, we can't be passive, I guess, in
Yeah.
that solidarity. You can't wait around for something to happen. Like, when's it going to pop off? Because it's like already happening.
Exactly,
It's
yeah.
like, where are you?
Yeah.
I mean, in the United States, it's difficult, I think, because there's like sort of geographic difference and like a definitely like different and probably worse way of thinking about indigenous people and indigenous solidarity. But like, it's still happening. Like, there's still
Well, and like Standing Rock was a great,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
Or,
totally.
I just started reading this great book called The Red Deal, which is a play on the Green New Deal and so on. And, there was a manifesto circulated, and then it kind of got expanded into like a book project, small book. And it's great because it's about indigenous kind of, I don't know how to put it best. Like, the collective is not just indigenous peoples, but it's about sort of thinking about our political and economic and ecological challenges from the perspective of indigenous solidarity, right? And it's really great to read as a person in both the US or Canada, because it intentionally sort of renders that border, obsolete or complicated, I guess.
Yeah.
Obsolete's a bad word, but it understands that the solidarity extends beyond
Right.
the settler borders, right?
Yeah.
It opens with a scene from the Wet'suwet'en struggle, right? And it includes stuff about Standing Rock and Bolivia and the plurinational stuff going on there, right? And all that to say, I'm reading that text, and it's a really good example of, like, I don't know, understanding that you can find your way into the struggle regardless of where you are, even though it's going to take a lot of work to figure out the specificity of where you are.
Yeah, totally. I think that's right. So, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the struggle is happening. It's just like, can you pay attention to where it is, or can you find where it is, or can you find a way to be in solidarity with those people, wherever you are or something is the question that kind of comes up, not when's it going to happen.
Yeah, and it's weird I don't know. I feel like the tone I'm striking in this is like the tone of a person giving advice, which I don't like, because I don't feel comfortable doing that. But I think, to me, it's more like these are all things that when I say that you should do, I'm sort of speaking maybe in like,
Like, maybe I should think about it more.
reflexively. It's
Yeah.
like I'm saying that unto myself, right? Of being
Yeah.
like, it's important to think through like how I'm implicated in colonial violence as a Roman Catholic person living in Toronto, trying to go to solidarity protests, trying to
Yeah.
listen to speakers, and sort of, figure out what that means, right? And just being willing to struggle through all that stuff and mess it up, and I don't know, keep on figuring it out, I think is really difficult in my own experience, but important to get on the path.
Yeah, that's true. Well, all that to say, we went to a rally and we got really really excited about it. Which I guess maybe if everyone went to a rally and then they made a podcast about it, well, I was gonna say the world would be better, but it's not.
No.
There would just be more podcasts, I guess, and that's cool too.
It's like it's like a really unfortunate version of like COP26 in small form, right? The blah 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 problem and all the rest of it. But
here we are, we're blah blah blahing ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyways, maybe if nothing else, it's a call to pay attention to those types of struggles, and not just for you, but also for us, because I don't know, we should probably take our own advice better. But all that being said, capitalism is bad. Pay attention to those struggles. That's it, man. That's it. That's the only way you can sum it up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, there you go. I don't know. This is what it's like when we get in the same room. A lot of rambling and trying to figure out what we're doing that day and talking about. But we went to one rally. We went to an art museum. We went to a shoe museum. And here we are, still trying to put it together.
We'll get there.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. I don't know. You can find us on social media, etc., blah, blah, blah. Our music is by Maury Armstrong. Our outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. At least I would else.